Hi, my name is Cynthia Perez, and I am the founder of Rooted in Reflection. I'm so excited to offer this mini course on protecting your peace and detaching from Marianismo. I don't even want to call it a course. Let's take that back. This is really just a conversation to hopefully ignite further conversations within you, all the parts of you that know this conversation that we're going to have together. But I also invite you to carry this conversation further to your siblings, to your family, to your parents, to your grandparents if you're near them, if they're around, to elders, to your extended family, maybe to friends, but really carrying a conversation that is says I deserve to keep being in spaces where I can really reconcile times where I wasn't able to protect my peace. And I'd love to talk to my community about this. So I hope this is what this can offer, a way to start a conversation. That's why I made it free, because I talk about Marianismo and protecting our peace and epigenetics so in so many of my courses. But this is something I really wanted to offer to just get the ball rolling of like, first of all, what is Marianismo? If you are like, I'm here because I kind of think I know, fair. Thank you for being here. I really just want to talk about it. And also understanding Marianismo in our DNA, now what, right? Like now that we've found love, what are we going to do with it? So, what are we going to do with this Marianismo within us? And I just hope that this conversation leads you feeling empowered, thoughtful, and also privileged to be in this time where you have the space to unravel yourself. So, who am I? My name is Cynthia Perez, and I am a therapist with Rooted in Reflection. I want to acknowledge that right now I am sitting on Tongva land and land of the Chumash people. It is called Los Angeles, Long Beach, the Gabrielinos. And I want to acknowledge that. And I've always loved living here since my parents immigrated here from Yucatan. So, another land that I hold dear to my heart is Yucatan, where my family is from. They are from Merida. And I say that because that is going to be a really big part of our conversation, acknowledging not only the land that we're on now and every pain, injustice that the mothers and Mother Earth has felt on the land that we're on right now, but also the land that misses us, the land that remembers us as a dream of our ancestors, of our mothers, and so our lands are very important into our Marianismo, or really our mother's Marianismo, and protecting our peace. So this is a little bit about me. My name is Cynthia Perez. I am the middle daughter of two Mexican immigrants. My parents married at, I believe my mom was like 24 years old, which was pretty late, I think. No, she had me at 26. So anyway, they married young. They had my sister in Merida, Yucatan, the capital of Yucatan, which is a peninsula. And I say that because it's very important to my story. In the Yucatan Peninsula, everything is surrounded, the land is surrounded completely by water, right? That is the essential part of a peninsula. And my family's from Merida, which is a half hour from the beach. So going to the beach is a very everyday thing in Merida. But also, my abuelas were born, my paternal abuela was born in a what you might call a hut, but a casa con palapas. So, on the beach, in the dirt. And I realized that I'm not that far removed from her life. That was only my dad's mother that grew up living like that, and her mother. And so I'm only the second generation to have a house like this. In fact, my dad just told me, oh, yeah, we didn't have a toilet. We had an outhouse my whole life until I was 30, and my sister bought my mom a toilet in the house. So when I think about that, I can put myself in my grandmother's shoes as a woman, as a mother, and understand the deep Marianismo that is within her. So I'm going to get into that a little bit. So I have a younger brother, an older sister, and so often we talk about Latinas, the older sister, but I want to say that the middle sisters are usually forgotten because I don't hear about them. I hear about the younger and the older. And I'm here to say I feel like that is also something that has contributed to my Marianismo wound, is being this middle child of like having to keep the family in peace at all costs, because the older sister is doing the logistics and being strong, and the younger one is being protected. So the middle one has to do a dance. And that is very much part of my Marianismo. So I'm going to get into that. But these are some pictures of myself and moments I can see my epigenetics just triggered to be a people pleaser, to be a calmer, to be a cutie little happy person, so that my mom and my family know the pace of the home, you know? So we're going to get into that. And so first I ask you sitting there to really make this part for you and your awareness now. I ask you to look at these photos and, you know, even pick one or two. What is calling your body and spirit right now? What would you be doing right now if you could absolutely escape and do this? Pick a couple pictures and then kind of notice, maybe, why are you feeling like this? Is there a need that you have? So, with some of the questions I want to ask, what land are your people from? And what did people in your lineage do enjoy? What were they exceptional at? Now, this is a slide that comes from my Epigenetics and Marianismo 4-hour course. And I use this in here because it's so important to just have a pause to think about where my ancestors are from and what they did in that land, because that is going to help us work through some of these deep wounds that come up when we're trying to protect our peace, when we are trying to finally live in this peace that we've asked for, that we've made space for, that we've had boundaries for. Well, then what? Well, consider that the key to that piece is really just honoring the legacy of your ancestors, your grandparents, your mother, your father, your abuelos, and living in that joy that they couldn't. And specifically, if we're talking about the Marianismo wound, honoring the joy that your abuelos, your abuelas, and your bisabuelas and tatarabuelas, what they would do when they were feeling sad, when they were feeling stressed. Because when we can channel that by doing these ancestral movements, like my grandmother would sew. She was an embroiderer. I come from a long line of embroiderers. And even crying, she would be sewing and singing her boleros. And that would help her work through whatever she was grieving. And she had a lot of grief because she lived a life of poverty and constantly taking care of everybody in her home. So when I'm feeling stressed, I can lean into the joy that she would do. And that helps to wipe out any epigenetic stress that is in my body. So to learn more about epigenetics, I host different courses and events. I'm going to touch on it a little bit. It's just a really broad topic, but basically we are using the DNA code of our epigenetics. Our survival gene is what our epigenetic code is. We are untapping that code to unlock our ancestors, our abuelas' magic, what they would do to be joyful. And when we let ourselves do that, like cooking, dancing, singing, crying, we are unlocking that gene and letting it move through us. And that is going to help us filter out that wound using our own abuela's medicine. Isn't that fascinating? So I wonder what you came up with these questions. Really sit with this and know that that is a part of your story. When you're feeling stressed, when you're feeling not enough, that is because your story also involves where your ancestors are from and what they did to relax, to be in peace, what they were experts at. Okay, moving on. This is a little bit of why I want to talk about Marianismo. I am a licensed clinical therapist. I've been a social worker since I graduated in 2010, but I did 2 years of free internship. And before that, I have my bachelor's in Chicano Latino studies because I've always been fascinated with this work in Latinidad. And so for the 8 years I was going to school for my bachelor's and my graduate degree, I also led camps. I did after school programs, I ran summer camps, sleepaway camps, and I always found myself in these creative spaces. I love creating in the outdoors. I love building community. And I realized that is something that my abuela would have loved to do, and I'm leaning into that. So the reason I am so hell-bent on Marianismo is because I used to work in healthcare, and I left in the pandemic because it was just so traumatic and troubling for me. But even before the pandemic, I started stumbling upon this frustration within the healthcare systems that wasn't being addressed. And that was the big evidence of Latinas and Latinos getting diabetes and cancer and infertility. And there wasn't enough studies showing why. And these women are like shaming themselves, feeling bad, getting these messages to just eat these white-centered foods instead of their cultural foods, and just really feeling this depression, this loss of identity. And so I started doing some research, and I found that there's not a lot of research. So I found a couple of articles. This article was fantastic, and it talks about the percentage of women who develop perinatal depression in the United States. Now, this article talks about how 15% of women report having perinatal depression. This is like postpartum depression or anxiety, while 52% of Latinas in the US report having perinatal depression. That is a huge difference from the collective of women and then Latinas. And I actually think both of these numbers are underreported. I have been a medical social worker. I was a medical social worker for 8 years. I believe that this number is highly underreported by women and Latinas. So I'm going to go ahead and say that this number is a lot higher. And what I have found is that Marianismo has not been researched enough. And I believe, because I've done my own research with epigenetics, which is our evolutionary gene that is turned on to help us survive trauma, using past ways of surviving trauma, running, fighting, flighting, working, creating, right? Migrating, peacemaking, avoiding. All of that can be unlocked in our epigenetics when we feel threatened. So I want you to consider now, I'm proposing, because if there's not a lot of research, it's telling me, as not only a Latina, but as a therapist and a researcher and a student, right? This is telling me that our stories, our abuela stories, our mother stories are absolutely important for this missing data. So using some of this data, that Latinas have the highest rates for heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and infertility, I want us to try to corroborate this with saying that Marianismo contributes to this, in the sense that when we as women are not able to live a life of autonomy, to not have safety, to be our most creative selves, when we are living a life that is attached to caring for all the men and children in the community and in our homes, we are going to suffer. Our body is going to suffer in physical ways. So, in my course, Epigenetics and Marianismo, we talk about the spiritual, emotional, and physical ways that Marianismo impacts us as the next generation, and how we are carrying this trauma gene to go off in our other generation. So I want you to consider the Marianismo is something that our mothers have shown us, that our mothers have lived and carried out, and it's something we've observed, but it's also definitely something that's within our bodies. Our bodies have been holding on to this ability to care for everybody as a way to survive. So Marianismo is absolutely in our epigenetics. And that might look like a knowing, that might look like gut issues, that might look like fertility issues, but it might also feel like this deep, bigger than you knowing. Have you ever had something happen and you're just like, I'm sad, but this feels like a bigger sadness. This feels like I've felt this before. This feels almost larger than me. First of all, consider that your epigenetic switch being turned on to feel past pain that your abuelas felt and couldn't release. It's trapped in there as a way to remember, okay, this is what might happen. So when that epigenetic switch is turned on, and it might make you feel like running away from the situation, crying, fighting through it, being defensive or being vindictive. Consider that that might be your epigenetics turned on, and what this could be in another way. This author that I've had the pleasure of connecting with this year on my podcast, and I talk about her work whenever I can, is Natalie Gutierrez. She wrote the book The Pain We Carry: Healing from Complex PTSD for people of color. Let me try to get this. I carry this book all the time. It's such a great resource, and it really highlights the stories of our abuelos and people of color in general. And our stories are so similar and intertwined. But she calls it, right? And so she did not create the term legacy burdens, but I really appreciate the way she talks about our stories in legacy burdens. So she writes, due to these painful and perhaps prolonged occurrences, you have naturally developed negative beliefs about yourself and the world. These beliefs and energy accompanying them are burdens that you internalize and carry within, both consciously and unconsciously, that dictate how connected, protected, and safe you feel or don't feel. So these legacy burdens absolutely are attached to our epigenetic codes to protect us. Like, oh, we have this burden of our immigration, so we should compensate, right, by getting a higher degree, by being very strict on the way we live our lives, not ever doing anything that is risk. So we might understand our legacy burdens and know them, but we also might subconsciously be living in our legacy burdens, performing as such, and not even be aware of them. And this is definitely something our mothers may have just performed and showed us by the way that they lived their life, you know, or it could be something that they absolutely told us in a way we had to live by shaming us. This might look like, why are you going outside without makeup? Why are you showing so much skin? But also, like, you need to serve everybody when they're at your house. You need to make your all the men a plate, fix them food. You come last. You need to be humble. These are legacy burdens that not only we have developed that are internalized within us, but they very well could be carried in our epigenetics through just generational adaptation of having to live in this legacy burden, right? So as another generation, we're carrying the codes that our grandmothers, our mothers have. And they say you carry the first three generations above you the highest, right? The strongest, because it's the strongest in our DNA. So think about the life your mother and your grandmother had, whether you knew them or not. That is going to impact the way you move in this world now and the way you show up. So it's absolutely important to consider the Marianismo gene, or the Marianismo burden in our epigenetics every day. Mm. And I hope we can find some compassion by the end of this. So, what is Marianismo, right? This is called Marianismo. What is it? Well, if you're Latina or even a Latino or gender neutral, but you grew up in a Latino home, you know this feeling, the energy, but maybe you didn't know it as Marianismo, and that's fine. I believe I know it because I have a bachelor's in Chicano Latino studies, and I didn't know the term, and I became fascinated with it. And this is why I love Rooted in Reflection, is because we offer a space to talk about terms that aren't highlighted in American psychology, but are so important for us to understand before we can start healing wounds. If we don't know these terms, how can we even address them? So, a definition of Marianismo is it emphasizes the role of women as family and home centered. It encourages passivity, self sacrifice, and chastity. A Marianista orientation depicts women in nurturing roles and prescribes respect for patriarchal values. So historically, though, Marianismo is rooted in Christian values that are brought into a Latino American during colonization. So it's really defined as women as nurturing figures, spiritual pillars of the family, but it's a construction of this expected female gender role based on the Virgin Mary. Now, I go into the history of how Marianismo came from this role of the Virgin Mary and Tonantzin, and how it's really taken an indigenous figure, and colonialism, by the Spanish, took this indigenous figure of fertility and prosperity and land, took her and turned it into this way of worshiping the Virgin Mary, but also it prescribed women indigenous and now mestizo women back, back in colonial times, it prescribed them this role of Marianismo, which is basically to serve the man, to take care of these men who are trying to uphold Christianity, Catholicism, actually Catholicism. And so they're out there doing this work for God to spread Catholicism everywhere, colonialism, right? And patriarchy. So the women's role is to take care of the men and the children and do it with gratitude, because that's what a good saint would do, right? So what this creates is a false expectation of how to behave as a female, as a woman. And it really strips women of their own knowing and intuition, because it's saying the church knows what's best for you. The church has these roles that they need you to fulfill. And I argue in my course that when we do this, we are also detaching women from their connection with their children and with their own identity, their spiritual identity. And this makes women feel insecure, leads to depression, anxiety, gut issues, maybe jealousy of their own children. The epigenetic switch might create this blockage of care from their children, because the mother is so traumatized with her own identity issues, right? So Marianismo is absolutely harmful to the mother, but we have internalized this for so many generations, we may not know that we're even doing it. That is how I found myself in this work. This is a picture of my mother and my paternal grandparents. So that's my dad's dad and my dad's mother. But this, I realized this is the one and only time they visited us in California. This is at Disneyland. And this is the only time. And I always was like, look at this picture. I've looked at this picture my whole life, and I realized how my parents must feel. They immigrated and they finally got to see their parents after I'm like one. So this is probably like 3 years after they immigrated. They didn't know, my grandparents didn't know how we were. This is the first time. Think about all the emotion. And then my mother here being the daughter-in-law, how much pressure she felt to host her parents-in-law, knowing the role of a good Latina mother and wife, right? This Marianismo role. They don't call it Marianismo, okay? We as Latinos don't go, oh, they're machismo and I'm Marianismo. We don't really call it that. We just know. It's this like knowing, and it's also very much feeling shame for it. I can't believe you didn't fix him a plate. I can't believe you, would disrespect your dad by wearing this outfit that's sexy. It's these little ways, these languages, big and small, that we have learned of Marianismo. So it's when I finally can look at this picture and go, wow, look at all the feelings that not only my grandmother must be feeling, my dad must be feeling when he sees his mom after all these years, my mother, her role, and just the energy me and my sister are picking up on as daughters, right? And then this is me at 25, going back on my own to the beaches of Progreso, Yucatan, where my mother grew up, spending her summers at the beach. But what I didn't realize is that this is me at 25, and I had just had a miscarriage from who was my now husband. But I was leaving him to never come back to him because we had a miscarriage, and it was just so traumatic for me that I didn't want to be with him. So I left to Yucatan to be alone. And in that, I found myself crying with my cousin and my aunt. And what I've realized now at almost 40 is that I always go back to this beach. I went when I was 15 on my own. I went when I was 20 on my own, 25 on my own, 30, 35 on my own. And now I go and I take my kids. My point is I realize that the land is like a mother to me. The land is like Tonantzin, is like Chacmul. The land is like this loving mother that always welcomes me. It's like my abuela's home of saying, come back home. I know you've had a hard time. So when I'm feeling overwhelmed with all of my roles as a woman, as a mother, I remember how important the land is to me. Look how happy I am. And with the malecon behind me. And now when I hear my mother, she's 72, all of her stories are like Progreso and eating at her favorite restaurants on the beach. And so I realized that this is within me as well. If her pain is within me, the way that I find peace is also within me of how my mom found peace. Because gosh darn it, she's right. Whenever I go back to this beach, I have peace. And that's because I am unlocking the epigenetic codes of my abuela and my mother and all of my tatarabuela, all my lineages are on this beach. So it's funny how while the anxiety and depression and expectations that I carry of my mother and my abuela's Marianismo, I also carry their joy and their ability to relax with water, with land, and just in places that remind me of my lineage. So, as a recap, if you don't identify with Latino or Latinidad, or you feel detached from your Latinidad, and you're like, oh my gosh, I was born in the States, same here, and I can understand this in my mother, but I couldn't really put a word on it. Well, here you go. If you're a person of color and you find that you can relate to this in your own mother, absolutely yes. Because as a person of color, there's colonization that has kept our ancestors protected for good reasons. So they go into protective mode and have taught us these. So you can find out more about different roles of women of color in my courses, epigenetics and Marianismo, because absolutely women of color fall into these expectations as well. And we talk about them. So welcome here to talk about it. And just to know that this was done out of protection long ago. So how do we move from protector mode, ready to fight or ready to protect ourselves, to protected mode, confident in ourselves, confident in our worth, confident that we are able to make our good decisions, trust our intuition, and protect ourselves because we have this inner knowing, and then to live in our peace. So I present assessing how our body is feeling and creating a quick way to remind ourselves to get back on track to our peace. And I say that with practice, grace, and daily ritual of softness, protecting your peace will become as second nature as our ABCs. And because maybe our elders didn't get time and space to practice these ABCs of protecting our peace, but this is our privilege to be able to do that. So let's try it. Let's give it a chance. And let's also try to bring our own ancestral knowing into it as a way of honoring it. Because when you do something enough times, you are rewiring your brain thanks to neuroplasticity to make that a new habit, to make that a new way you move. And what you're also doing is unlocking your epigenetic codes to remember this joy that your abuelas used to do, to remember how to do things with your hands, to remember your artistic craft, because it's within you, it's in your genes. So let's go. Couple of questions. So I want you to go ahead and pause this for as long as you need, but pre-write, what does peace look like? What does it sound like? What does it taste like? And what does it feel like in your body? We say we want peace, but if we don't know what peace looks like, how do we know we found it? How do we know when we can be grateful and just rest in it? So, what does it feel like in this future to have inner peace? What does it feel like to be in a peaceful environment? Go ahead and pause this video and just let yourself free write and see what comes up. Okay, building on to that, pick a new page and let's just imagine, what would I have to let go of to achieve this peace? What do I need to add more of to my ritual to be in this peace that I crave? Right? One's letting go of something and one is adding. What are we going to add to our lives? Our rituals, right? Because we are a delicate dance. We are this wondrous living ancestor that was once this amazing child. Our ancestors were once these beautiful children, and their inner children live within us. So now, what can we add to our daily ritual to be in this peace that could be within us, this living ancestor peace? And what or who is keeping me from this peaceful flow? Sometimes we don't want to really get down to these questions, but what or who is keeping us from this flow? And when we can start to create this clear path of how to get to our peace, we start to see like, I value myself and I'm going to go ahead and put this into action. So go ahead and take your time and write this down. All right, tying this back together to the ABCs of protecting your peace. I hope you use the self-love toolkit that is free. Download that and use that in companion with this, or use that on your own. It's absolutely something you can use. It has nothing to do with Marianismo. I just wanted to offer this video as a little for us in Latinidad who are like struggling with all of these expectations. But by all means, the self-love toolkit is absolutely in conjunction with this. So let's do a little recap of how we can use the ABCs of protecting your peace. So the first one is awareness. We've talked about Marianismo within our mothers and our grandmothers and our tatarabuelas, all these women in our lineage, and maybe you're feeling some of these behaviors within you. For example, one day I remember my mom came over and she brought the kids a bunch of toys and goodies. And it was frustrating to me because I told her, Mom, you don't need to show up giving. You can just show up as yourself. We love you, right? The first one. And it's really hard for my mother to come over and not give. And I told her, your presence is the gift, Mom. And she was so anxious, and it's really hard for her to just sit and be in the moment. And I'm like, Mom, be in peace. Just sit with us. And she's restless. She's restless. So by the time she leaves, my anxiety is now elevated. I'm annoyed. I'm restless. I'm picking up on her energy. And as she leaves, I say, goodbye, Mom. I'm now restless. I find myself snapping at my kids, being restless, looking for something, and it looks like this. It looks like me moving around the house. It looks like me looking for something to be mad about, looking for something to clean, something to do, because now I have this anxiety that is restless in my body. My mom like threw me the ball. I caught her Pokemon. And as I'm about to like yell at my kids for anything, I don't even remember what it was. It was my thing, right? I found myself looking at myself frozen and realizing, oh my gosh, I am now acting on my mom's Marianismo. That is what I'm doing. I am now fully activated. My epigenetic switch is turned on for her mother's Marianismo because I know that my grandmother acted like my mother. I've seen it. And here's my mom at 72 acting like it. And here's me about to go carry on. And I realize, oh my gosh, I have just unlocked this epigenetic switch of Marianismo within me. And that was the awareness. And since then, I have never recovered from that awareness. Having that awareness made me go, wow, this is what it feels like for my mother when she's restless. It's this switch that feels so profound. So I don't think my mom has awareness of her restlessness. I think that's just how she's always known women to show up. So I want to just say the awareness part is so important to move on. So we have to sit with awareness. How am I feeling in my body, in my spirit? Is my mind telling me that people are expecting this of me, that people don't like me if I don't show up with gifts? If I am not enough just on my own, or I can't just say I want company, I have to bring something. What is the awareness telling me about how I'm feeling or thinking? So that day I had awareness. And then the next one would be boundaries. What do I need right now to find peace? Okay, well, in that moment, I found myself about to yell at my kids. What I needed was a boundary for myself. I needed to walk away and sit with this big awareness. So the boundary was saying, I'm really sorry. I need to walk away. Mama's not doing well. I need to calm down. And I'll be right back. I love you. Building a boundary. But maybe a boundary for me in another way could be not visiting my mother when I myself am restless, because it's like two cars que van a chocar, right? It's not going to be good. But, or another boundary I've had is like, now my mother is aging and she needs me. And so one of the boundaries I do is I make sure I take care of all of the things I need of myself. I'm well rested, I'm well fed, I meditated. I am going to be an environment. I set a boundary for myself that when I do go see my mom, I am in control of my environment, of my energy, and I am preparing myself for this interaction. So I don't go in there just feeling completely vulnerable. I am moving myself from protective to protected. So setting up boundaries. And then the last one is compassion. I've already met my needs with my boundaries, but I might feel some kind of way about it, right? And so when I give myself compassion, like that day, I still, mind you, I'm having full body goosebumps talking about that day. You can't see them, but the day that I realized that I have my mom's Marianismo, I was like, oh my gosh, Cynthia, my inner critic was instantly like, and you talk about your mom, look at you, you're gonna give your kids this same feeling of not enoughness because of your mom's Marianismo. You're doing it too. But when I could stop myself and give myself compassion, comfort myself and go, wow, you're restless because you've grown up around women who are restless, always looking for something else to do, someone else to take care of, and they have not been able to just sit in their peace. Wow, Cynthia, this is so big. And we need to take our time with this. Like, do you need to lay down? What would make you feel better? And then I let myself cry, maybe. But I just want to say that while I give myself compassion, I feel my body start to calm and soften. I feel my awareness start to peek through more and go, yeah, you're right, right? To take notice. And then the beautiful thing, and mind you, this might be slower or faster for some people, depending on their relationship with their mother, and no rush, no guilt, nothing. But I started to find compassion for my own mother. Yeah, because I realized, oh my gosh, I'm 39 and I found awareness of this Marianismo gene that I keep doing to my kids. And my mom still isn't aware of it because who was going to tell her? And when was she going to be safe enough to like uncover this about herself? And what books does she know about to read about Marianismo, right? So I started to have compassion for her. And then my awareness started to go, yeah, you see that? And my compassion started to build for my abuelas and my tatarabuelas and the land that they were on and the history of Marianismo and women. So do you see how having compassion for myself with time can unravel compassion for others? And it also unfurls my awareness. And then it's like a cycle. Then it allows me to make boundaries for myself and my mother and my family easier. Because once I have compassion for myself, I value myself and I value this energy and I value showing up in a compassionate, loving way. So once I have compassion, the boundaries and the awareness is going to be easier to manage. And then I'm going to show up as a more loving presence for my elders, for my youngers, because I don't want to do that to them. And it's going to become easier in my day to day to sit in this peace that I have created, moving from protective to protected. So I hope that you got something from this. This is just supposed to be a little nugget. What I like to say with reading reflection is this is not the work. This is showing you a framework, but you do the work every day with inviting your awareness, with vulnerable experiences, with awareness, with doing the work every day. So I encourage you to use this in comparison, with the self-love toolkit, but also I have 10 courses that I've curated. Five of them have CEUs for California therapists, but by all means, you don't have to be a therapist to take my courses. All of my courses are available for the public. The CEU is just a little bonus for therapists because I really want to teach therapists, educators, healthcare workers, and adults, right? About more awareness, whether it's talking about our loving inner child or being a living ancestor, our awareness for ourselves and how we can lean into our peace in several ways. So I really hope to see you in a course, at a live event, or hosting your next company um, empowerment talk. But I hope this snippet was a little bit of a taste for you to just build on your own awareness. And I leave you with this. The key to protecting your peace and being in your peace is first allowing yourself to live in it, but also doing what used to feel good to your elders, living in that joy, letting those epigenetic gifts flow out of you, whether it was art, food, dance, emotion, creativity. Let that take you somewhere and see how your awareness expands. This is a picture of me again on that trip as a 25-year-old in I went back and my aunt, my tia Sara, who is my dad's sister, she welcomed me back and she always knows how to give me that medicina. We would go to Progreso, we buy cocos, we eat botanas in La Playa, we cry, we listen to music, and she tells me stories of my grandmother and my great grandmother and their curanderismo. And I just sit there fascinada, drinking my little coco or my piña. And so, being in my peace means not only hearing stories of my antepasados, but living in these stories by unraveling myself, honoring my boundaries, and building my awareness with loving compassion. If you would like to find us at another event or message us for a private offering, you can find us at rootedinreflection.org or find us on Instagram at rooted_in_reflection. We also have an amazing podcast called Confetti All Around, where we talk about the growth that we experience, but also the mess behind it. You can find Confetti All Around on our website, but you could also find it on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And we host some amazing guests that talk about things just like this: ancestral healing, epigenetics, living in our peace, and honoring our inner child joy. I hope to see you in another space with us. Thank you so much. My name is Cynthia Perez, and it's been a pleasure.